Hey guys, tonight we trudge through frozen dawns where frost bites the edges of your cloak and the morning light barely peeks over jagged fjords. Imagine stepping outside your Viking farmhouse before the sun dares to rise, your boots crunching on the crusted snow, breath puffing in little clouds that quickly vanish into the icy air. You probably won't survive this morning without a hardy layer of wool or a stubborn sense of determination. But don't worry, the Vikings made it look almost poetic. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. I'm curious if anyone is watching this while wrapped in a blanket or braving the real chill. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So as you sink into the glow, take a mental note of how the smoke twists and turns, curling lazily toward the ceiling, carrying whispers of centuries-old survival techniques. Mainstream history tells us that every Viking household had a central hearth, carefully placed to maximize warmth throughout the house. Families would cluster around it, not only to cook meals, but also to dry damp clothing, warm feet, and stave off the creeping cold that seeps into every corner of a timber home. Fringe accounts suggest some villagers would hang small pouches of aromatic herbs above the fire, claiming it purged negative spirits or made the air feel warmer. Scholars still argue whether these pouches were practical, symbolic, or somewhere delightfully in between. But imagining a Viking household perfumed by pine needles and sage adds a quirky charm to the harsh Nordic landscape. As you kneel to stir the embers, you notice the subtle techniques each family seems to have mastered. Firewood isn't just stacked, it's arranged with precision. Small twigs at the top for ignition, denser logs beneath to sustain a slow, consistent burn. You watch a mother demonstrate to a child how to blow gently at embers to coax them into life, a skill you probably underestimate if you've only ever pressed a button for instant heat. Lightheartedly, you might picture Vikings comparing fire techniques the way we compare coffee machines today, debating over whether birch or oak produces a better flame. Vikings were nothing if not creative about conserving warmth. Beyond the central hearth, they'd employ heat-retaining stones placed near the bed or under seating platforms, absorbing the day's heat and releasing it slowly through the night. Fringe accounts also hint at the occasional fire pit under the floor in wealthier homes, though historians still argue whether such innovations were common or limited to elite households. The important part is the principle. Heat was stored and shared strategically, almost like the building itself had a heartbeat, pulsing warmth throughout every nook. You might chuckle at some of the more peculiar habits. In certain regions, villagers reportedly carried small embers wrapped in cloth to bed, claiming it kept nightmares at bay and toes toasty. Modern historians debate the authenticity of this practice, but imagining Vikings tucking tiny, glowing parcels under their blankets is both endearing and a little absurd. You feel the heat radiate, not just physically, but psychologically. The knowledge that heat is controlled, that you have some measure of comfort against the relentless Nordic winter. By midday, the hearth is a center of subtle community interactions. Children gather near to toast small pieces of bread, elders trade stories while fanning smoke in deliberate patterns, and the livestock in adjoining stalls contributes residual heat that makes even the stone floor feel mildly pleasant. You trudge to the corner, feeling the contrast between icy drafts and fire's comforting glow. Here, warmth is more than temperature. It's routine, culture, and gentle ingenuity combined. Historians still argue whether these daily rituals were strictly utilitarian or also social performances, but either way, it's impossible to deny their cozy effectiveness. You step back into the frigid air briefly before retreating once more to the comforting walls of the Viking home, and your attention turns to the subtle armor of warmth, clothing. You probably won't survive a Nordic winter without it, but the Vikings treated layers with almost artistic care, blending necessity with practicality. So settle in, notice the weight of wool on your shoulders, the scratch of hide under your tunic, and the faintly pungent scent of lanolin from freshly cleaned sheep's fleece. Mainstream history shows that Viking farmers wore multiple layers of wool, linen, and animal skins to trap heat. The inner layer, usually linen, absorbed sweat, while wool and hides provided insulation against the biting cold. Furs, often from fox, reindeer, or even more exotic sources acquired through trade, added both warmth and a touch of social signaling. Fringe accounts hint at occasional decorative items doubling as insulation, like small pouches filled with moss or feathers sewn into cloaks, which historians still debate as to their widespread use. But imagine a Viking walking across the snowy yard, cloak puffed like a medieval sleeping bag, appearing both ridiculous and remarkably prepared. Every layer has a purpose, but there's also a visual hierarchy. Wealthier families might have embroidered woolen cloaks or dyed furs, while simpler households layered undyed hides with remarkable ingenuity. Oddly, some farmers inserted small bits of straw inside garments around the torso or limbs, a fringe practice that supposedly offered extra warmth. Scholars still argue whether this was common or an eccentric innovation by particular families, but the image is charming. Picture a Viking waddling with pockets stuffed full of straw, perhaps hoping no neighbor notices. Accessories play a surprisingly significant role. Hats, mittens, and boots made of reindeer leather or felted wool not only prevented frostbite, but became extensions of personality. Mainstream accounts describe thick leather boots stuffed with dried grasses for insulation. Fringe lore suggests some even wrapped their hands in thin layers of animal fat for added heat, though historians debate whether this was widespread or merely a poetic exaggeration. You might find yourself smirking at the thought of a Viking carefully greasing their hands before heading out to chop wood, like a medieval skincare routine gone hilariously practical. Layering is also strategic. You observe the inner clothing absorbing body heat, while outer layers act as shields against wind and moisture. Sometimes cloaks are pinned or belted in particular ways to maximize coverage, and shawls are draped to trap warmth around the neck and shoulders. Mainstream historians note that mobility remains surprisingly high despite these layers, though fringe evidence hints that some Vikings developed near wearable tents out of cloaks during blizzards. Scholars still debate the feasibility of such extreme layering, but it adds to the quirky, inventive aura surrounding Viking daily life. By late morning, you notice villagers adjusting their garments subtly, loosening or tightening straps as they navigate shores, and layering items over one another depending on wind direction. Even small details, like doubling a woolen sock or tucking a hood beneath a fur-lined collar, speak to centuries of trial, error, and adaptation. You trudge along the snow-covered yard, heavy boots crunching, feeling the satisfaction of warmth carefully engineered, layer by layer. The combination of mainstream practicalities, fringe innovations, and scholarly debate paints a picture of Vikings not merely surviving, but elegantly managing the unforgiving cold. As the day drifts toward afternoon, you notice that surviving the cold isn't just about clothing or fire, it's about people. Communal strategies dominate the Viking mindset, and you quickly realize you probably wouldn't survive here without leaning on others, even if you're stubbornly independent. So, observe how neighbors huddle together, sharing warmth, advice, and occasionally a bit of gossip over steaming bowls of broth. Mainstream accounts show that Viking villagers often clustered in longhouses, sometimes with several families under one roof. Heat from one hearth radiated across the communal space, and sleeping arrangements were designed to maximize shared warmth. Fringe stories suggest that some households literally slept piled shoulder to shoulder during the harshest months, though historians still argue whether this was common or exaggerated in sagas. You can almost imagine the light-hearted banter, muffled by layers of wool, as a Viking complains that someone's elbow keeps freezing his side. Humor, it seems, was as much a tool for warmth as blankets themselves. Workshops and barns also doubled as communal refuges. Artisans, smiths, and even fish processors would spend long hours indoors, the combined body heat creating surprisingly temperate microclimates. Fringe evidence points to the occasional heated floor in wealthier homes where warm stones stored the day's heat to radiate through the night. Scholars still debate whether these practices were widespread, but for you, walking past a barn with steam curling from under doors, the principle is clear. Warmth was shared, intentionally or by happy accident. And social rituals contributed. During daytime gatherings, villagers exchanged not only news but warmth, crowding near fires, passing around hot drinks, or joining in brief, vigorous dances to stave off numbness. Mainstream historians note these interactions as subtle survival strategies, while fringe accounts suggest some festivals included heat games, competitive events meant to generate body warmth. You might chuckle at the idea of a Viking couple racing across the yard just to warm their toes, a human solution to a problem no modern thermostat could fix. Children weren't left out. Children weren't left out. Young ones would huddle under parents' cloaks while chores were completed, and teens would engage in small wrestling matches indoors, not for sport alone, but to circulate heat. Mainstream evidence confirms that these practices were commonplace, though fringe anecdotes describe the occasional child using a tiny heated stone as a personal hand warmer. Historians still argue if this was typical or an inventive exception. Regardless, the blend of cooperation, creativity, and a touch of eccentricity underscores Viking survival. Warmth wasn't just physical, it was social, psychological, and sometimes surprisingly entertaining. As dusk approaches, you see villagers returning from fields or chores, arms full of firewood or tools. They exchange greetings that are brief but heartfelt, perhaps because every interaction carries the unspoken recognition that survival depends on community. The longhouse glows, a nucleus of comfort amid the encroaching frost, and you feel that subtle satisfaction. When it comes to enduring endless nights, no lair, no hearth, and no trick matches the warmth of human connection. Remember that straw-stuffed clothing or heated stones from earlier sections? This communal approach multiplies those individual innovations exponentially. As night falls over the snow-laden landscape, your attention naturally turns to the four-legged inhabitants of the farm. Livestock, cows, goats, sheep, and even chickens aren't just a source of food or trade goods. They're silent allies in the battle against the cold. You probably wouldn't survive the endless Nordic nights without acknowledging the subtle ways these animals contribute warmth both literally and figuratively. So, step quietly into the barn, feeling the residual heat radiating from bodies huddled together in straw-lined pens. Mainstream history confirms that animals generated substantial heat, which farmers cleverly harnessed. Sheep resting near the main house could share warmth through adjoined stalls, while cows and goats provided not only body heat, but a small measure of psychological comfort. Fringe accounts suggest that some families would place smaller livestock, like chickens or pigs, inside sleeping quarters at night, though historians still argue about the prevalence of this practice. Imagine a Viking farmer gingerly tiptoeing around a clucking chicken huddled near the hearth, aware that these creatures are tiny feathered radiators. Managing the barn required skill. You trudge along aisles lined with straw, noticing how every design element, lofts, partitions, and bedding, aims to maximize warmth retention. Fringe details include the occasional heated stones tucked into straw, a debated practice, but one that shows the creativity Vikings employed to keep both themselves and their animals comfortable. You might chuckle at the idea of a goat pressing its nose into a heated stone, blissfully unaware of the long history of human ingenuity surrounding it. Inside the farmhouse, the benefits of animal heat continue. Shared body warmth extends through walls and floors, subtly reducing the chill that would otherwise seep in from frozen ground. Mainstream sources confirm that sleeping arrangements often relied on this principle, humans and animals alike contributing to a microclimate that allowed survival in harsh winters. Fringe evidence even hints that some households kept dogs or cats in close quarters, not merely as companions, but as natural heaters. Historians still debate whether these pets were always indoors or sometimes outdoors with livestock. By late evening, you notice the delicate interplay between animal allies and human routines. Farmers adjust bedding, rotate animals in stalls, and ensure ventilation while preserving heat. The barn smells faintly of hay, wool, and the earthy aroma of livestock, a comforting blend that speaks to centuries of adaptation. Fringe tales even suggest that some farmers used animal hides as portable blankets, layering them over human bedding, a hybrid strategy that might be debated by scholars, but certainly paints a cozy picture. As darkness settles fully, you step back, observing the farm as a living, breathing ecosystem. Heat circulates in subtle channels, from hearths to bodies, from clothing to aminals, and from communal closeness to whispered routines. The Viking farmer's ingenuity is everywhere, from straw paths to layered cloaks, from hearth rituals to livestock arrangements. Historians still argue which methods were universal and which were idiosyncratic, but the overarching lesson is clear. Warmth was both a necessity and an art, crafted from human ingenuity, shared effort, and a surprising alliance with the animals that walked, slept, and breathed beside them. Now, as the night deepens and snow muffles every sound outside, you can finally slow your pace. Imagine yourself leaning back, letting the soft warmth of the hearth and the gentle hum of the animals seep into your bones. The smell of burning wood mingles with faint traces of straw and wool, a calming aroma that reminds you of countless Viking households surviving, thriving, and even laughing quietly in the face of endless frost. You probably won't experience anything quite like it in a modern apartment, but for night, let your imagination carry you there. The layers of wool and hides, the carefully tended hearth, the hum of shared body warmth from friends, family, and livestock, all of these blend into a cocoon of comfort. You notice the subtle rhythms, the crackle of embers, the soft breathing of animals, the distant whisper of wind across the fjords. Fringe tricks like heated stones, moss-lined garments, and tiny aromatic pouches are tucked gently into your mind, not as oddities to dissect, but as tiny sparks of human creativity that made survival a little sweeter. Historians still debate the extent of these practices, but tonight you let them simply exist as gentle companions to your imagination. Your thoughts drift slowly, carrying small echoes from the day, the crunch of snow beneath boots, the warmth radiating from a fire-stoked longhouse, and the quiet camaraderie of neighbors sharing heat, stories, and laughter. The lessons of endurance, innovation, and care ripple softly like the fading glow of a dying fire. You notice how even the smallest comforts, a layered cloak, a shared blanket, the smell of straw, become monumental acts of survival. So, settle into that cozy, imagined longhouse. Feel the warmth radiate from every source, human and animal alike. Let your mind drift, unhurried and gentle, through the quiet, snow-draped landscape. Every crackle, every whisper, every subtle innovation fades into a soft lullaby.